Okay, today we're joined by Doug Garner, who was at Gold Leaf Team Lotus. Morning, Doug.
Hello, Gary. Sorry, I called you Phil then. Sorry, Gary. Yeah.
Who's Phil? So, how did you get started in motoring rather than racing to start with? Did you start sort of straight from school or college?
Yes, I wanted to. Yes, I was at school. I went to a secondary modern school in Enfield, and I decided that I wanted to be with cars. I mean, I'd always been interested in mechanical things, and I think that's the background for most people who end up with cars. He was managing director of a building company in Enfield, and he said, he knew of a garage, so he got me into a garage to start with as soon as I left school. Unfortunately, it was bodywork. It wasn't anything to do with mechanical side at all. He didn't realise that. Turned full circle. I'm now in Lincolnshire, which is where actually a lot of the cranes were manufactured in those days. So I did my apprenticeship with them. While I was there, a guy who was an electrician said to me, if you want a proper apprenticeship, you should get involved with the Metropolitan Police because they do a really good apprenticeship scheme.
Oh, okay.
I thought I'd have a crack at that. So we don't actually do apprenticeships at the moment. We do apprenticeship scheme, and I was the number one of the new apprenticeship scheme since the war. And part of the deal was I didn't get on that well at school. I wasn't very keen on that kind of side of things. But they insisted that I went to college. So I had to do 5 years sitting and stuff like that, which when I did, they promised me instant promotion. But after 5 years, I did that, and I went into the office. I had a fantastic manager. He was a really nice guy, really good guy. And I said to him, Cyril, can I be made up now? And it wasn't a big step. It was from apprentice to full-time mechanic. Wow. And he said, yes, he said, you're obviously fully qualified, but unfortunately we haven't got a place for you. Oh. So, we might have in a year or two's time. So that meant staying on as an apprentice for another couple of years, which obviously when you're that age, you're itching to get on, aren't you? So I thought, well, so I took a day off and I put my sitting guilds under my arm and walked around all the local garages. At college, there were a couple of guys there that actually worked at Lotus Guild certificate. They said, start tomorrow. So when I got to Lotus, mustachioed guy who obviously was ex-military, very smart-looking chap. And
this would be Lotus Cars.
This was in Lotus. Yes, this was at Lotus Cars at Chesham, which was just down the road from where I lived.
Yeah.
So I had a word with this chap, and he said, "Well, just hang on a minute." He said, and he disappeared into the building. And he came down 5 minutes later and said, "Follow me." Well, Lotus in those days had been extended and extended and extended, and it was a labyrinth of corridors and offices and all. So we went out. There were 3 guys sat behind a desk and a chair. It's like they were waiting for me. I couldn't believe it, So I sat down there in the development section of Lotus, and they said, "Well, would you like to go into the development of cars, on the development side?" And I thought, cool, this is a bit of a... I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest. So anyway, short story. Yes, I was in then, and then I was put into the development workshop, and I worked on the Europa, the Elan, and the S4 Elan, and the Plus 2, which was the new unit coming through.
Yeah,
and we took that the Plus 2. I worked on there for I can't remember how long it was, about 18 months maybe, and then we went to Norfolk.
Oh, right.
Still running the developing the Plus 2, because now we would put it down a production line. We were ironing out production line gremlins, which we'd never seen during our development side, but it was relevant to the guys getting used to making a car.
Sure.
So we kept on there for a bit, and then one night, what was it? It wasn't Derek Sleeth. He was on the Europa mainly, but I can't get the name of the guy now. He came through and he said, "Doug," he said, "we've got a car away being filmed. It's had a problem. It's damaged. Can you fix it? Can you stay on tonight? It's arriving on a loader." Yeah. So this was about 6 o'clock at night. So I said, "Yeah, okay." So anyway, this thing turned up at about 8 o'clock, and it was a Plus 2, and we got it off the trailer, It had been filming opening scenes from the Avengers with
Right.
driving it. Yeah, well, she wasn't driving it, but in the opening shots she was. And what they'd done is they jumped it over a bridge a couple of times and done some shots of that. And on one of the occasions, the right-hand rear wheel had stayed up inside the wheel arch when they came down. So they decided it had gone wrong. So they brought it back to the factory. It arrived, I was at about 8 o'clock at night, and they wanted to film the next day. So the truck driver went to stay in just down the road. I can't remember the place now. Anyway, he went and stayed overnight at a local hotel, and I pulled the car off and started work on it. Well, it was a fairly simple fix, but it needed a bit of welding and a bracket putting on. But the problem was we'd only moved into the workshop. We didn't have any ramps or lifts. We didn't have anything. It was like working in a hospital. It was absolutely clinical. The walls were white, the floor was grey, there was a bench and my toolbox. That was it, you know. So I jacked the thing up and I managed to work it up into the air so I could get the rear suspension. And when I got there, I realised I was going to need to weld it. So I looked around. I borrowed a set of welding gear from somewhere. Or I went in, because this was all the factory was all locked up now. So I had to go into another department and pinch a welding kit. I brought it back. And unfortunately, all it had was a gas axe in the nozzle because it wasn't designed for welding. So I was trying to weld underneath the car. It was only a foot off the ground. And I wasn't having much luck. So much so, I don't know if you've ever done any gas welding. If you get the nozzle too hot, it pre-ignites the gas and fires it like a gun, you know. So, and this can happen quite rapidly. So you get this bang, 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 you know, of the gun. Anyway, welding wasn't going well at all. So I thought, I smoked in those days. So I turned the gas axe off, stood up, I leaned on the top of the car, and I'm thinking to myself, now what do I do? So I had a cigarette, and I'm standing there thinking, and all of a sudden a voice behind me says, "Oh, we're having trouble welding." Well, I thought I was the only guy in the factory, to be honest, except for security. Well, I nearly jumped over the car because this bloke behind me had sort of, you know, it came out of nowhere. Because what had happened is he'd heard the noise and come through from next door, which was Team Lotus, which was next door.
Oh, right. Okay.
And of course, he wondered what the hell was going on. He thought he was the only bloke in the factory as well. I think they were working their normal hours. And anyway, we came through, and Arthur said, there's a guy called Arthur Birchall, turned into a good friend in the end. He said, "Well, would you want me to have a go?" So I said, "Oh, yeah, you know." So, of course, he got underneath and with a gas axe, welded the thing up, did a perfectly good job. And we put it back on the low loader. And in the early days of Hethel, the local control tower, which is the ex-military control tower that was there, had been turned into a pub, which was a great idea. One of the best ideas Lotus had. Right?
Well, I could try that. Sort of.
Yeah. So we went along to have a pint and a talk, and we did that, had a chat. And I said to Arthur at that time, "What is it you do then?" He said, "Oh, well, I'm next door at Team Lotus." So I said, "Oh, what are you working on?" And this is the first time I heard the expression, "Well, if I told you that, I'd have to kill you." You know? So fair enough. I won't ask anymore. And that was it. We had a pint and went out to separate ways. Anyway, about, I don't know how long, probably about 3 or 4 days, actually. I can't remember the exact time. Arthur came into my workshop, who I knew by now, and said, "Have you got a minute?" So I said, yeah, what for? You know, this guy had helped me out in the big time. So I thought, yeah, I've got time for him. So he said, "Follow me." So we went through this one-way door, and this one-way door was Team Lotus. That meant anybody from there could come out, but nobody could go in. It said on it, "Team Lotus, no entry," you know. Anyway, I went in, and he introduced me to Dick Scammell, who, of course, was chief mechanic at that time of the Indy team. And Dick said to me, right, he said, "Can you make me something? I want to try it." Yeah, so I said, "Okay, what do you want?" And he gave me a drawing of a bracket. And he said, "Can you make that?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, that's not a problem." Well, I've been doing these little drawings of stuff, developments next door. You know, we built the chassis and we built all the bits that went into it. So this was a piece of cake, you know. So I said, "Oh, can I do it next door? Because I've got all my kit there. He said, yeah, no problem. Off you go. So I did. It was only a teardrop bracket with a hole in it. It was quite simple, really. Anyway, I took it back after I'd done it, and it looked immaculate. You know, I'd done the best job ever of this. I'm thinking to myself, I'm getting some weekend work out of this. They want brackets making, do this. So anyway, I went in, I gave it to Dick, and he looked at it and said, oh, okay, threw it on the bench. And I thought it demanded more praise than that. But anyway, that's what I got. And then he got another piece of material, which was very nice. And he said, right, he said, can you do brazing? Not brazing. Can you do what do they call it? Nickel bronzing. Can you do bronzing?
Right.
So I said, oh, I think so. So he said, well, have a go at that. So I did it, and it looked like a really bad braze, because I don't know if you know, but nickel bronzing is really a skill, you know, to get the temperature right. Yeah. Anyway, he looked at that and he said, well, that's crap. He said, but we can teach you that. That's all right. Don't worry about that. And I thought, oh, okay. Yeah, here we go. And the next thing I knew, he said, when can you start? So I thought, and this threw me into a bit of a quandary, really, because the question didn't seem quite right somehow, you know. I thought he'd say, I want these made by the weekend or something, but not at all. He said, when can you start?
So this was a job interview.
Well, yeah, it was a job interview. I had no idea. How could be so naive, actually? I mean, Arthur should have said, you know. Anyway, upshot of it was, next thing I knew, he said, Dick said, well, he said, when can you start? So I said, well, I'll get it done today, if you like. He said, well, start tomorrow. And I said, oh, okay. I suddenly realised that's what I'd done. I'd enrolled myself. And he said, I said to Dick, I said, well, look, next door, I have no idea that I'm even in here, you know. Don't worry about that. I can take care of that. And off I went. I went home, and then the next day I started the Team Lotus. But the thing was,
when was this? When was this?
This was end of 1967.
Okay.
But the funny thing was that it hadn't been long before that we'd had a memo around to all departments that inter-department poaching of staff was strictly forbidden, because they had guys pinched from other departments, you see, up till then. And so they decided that wasn't good. That was, you know, sowing a lot of dissent in the system.
Yeah, sure.
And because not only that, what they wanted had come up from London, and they hadn't actually been able to recruit locally other than the production line.
Right.
So there was a guy with me whose name I should have written down before I got in here, because he was a good friend of mine, and he actually ended up, he was working on the Europa mainly, and he ended up as a director of Lotus Cars.
Oh,
so
wow.
there was a way of getting on. Roger Becker was his name.
Okay.
Roger Becker was an interesting guy, because he did a lot of the driving in the James Bond film. You remember the car that went underwater?
Yeah,
well,
sure.
He did a lot of the stunt driving for that.
Right.
He was actually in. He was on the film set. He went over to look after the car, and they weren't too happy with the stunt driver they'd got, although they hadn't said anything. And they said to Roger, "Can you nip down and fetch the car? We want it up here at the top of the hill and get a move on, because we got the cameras. You know, we want to get going. Well, the light's good. It's always the light, isn't it?" So Roger jumped in the car and drove it like you drive a Lotus. And when he arrived, they said, "We like that. You're doing the driving." And that was it. He got the job. He did a lot of the stunt driving and stuff like that.
Excellent.
Classic guy. He was a classic guy. Anyway, so where was I? Yes. So the next thing I knew, I was working on my first Lotus car, which was the 56, which
right,
was the
turbine,
4-wheel drive gas turbine.
Yeah.
So talk about in at the deep end. Yeah, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. That was a very interesting car, because we broke a lot of these things. But what had happened is STP had gone into 4-wheel drive. Andy Granatelli had done this. With who was it driving? Parnelli Jones drove his, and that was called the Fat Pig, because what they did is they put the turbine on the inside of the car and driver on the outside, you know, getting the weight in the middle as you do. And unfortunately a bearing went, and the car failed to finish the race, which is, you know, like they always say, a $7 bearing failed, and that was it. Anyway, when you consider how much it cost. Anyway, we were developing these cars, and as was longitudinal with the turbine behind the driver, and immediately in front of that was the four-wheel drive system, which came from Ferguson. And that was a Morse chain which came off. What you'd got basically is if you look at the inside of a gas turbine, you've got a row of compressor blades which sort of compress the air, then set light to it, and it comes out. So what they've done now, instead of using the thrust to drive the car forward, they put the thrust through another set of blades that was attached to a gearbox.
Oh,
so
right.
it drove the gearbox. So there was no clutch in between. So that's why it was full on all the time, which was a bit of a disadvantage. But anyway, the upshot of that was that we now got four-wheel drive. That went down. There was a ZF supplied diffs at the front and the rear, and we came off the Ferguson unit, and we had a drive shaft on the left-hand side, if I remember, driving the front wheels and the rear wheels with a 60-40 split. It was 60% of the front, 40% of the rear.
So when you started, it was the end of '67.
Yeah.
So the car had to be ready for Indy '68.
Yes, that was the idea.
You only had about 4 months on it, maybe less than that when you started.
Less than that, yes. There was quite a bit. The tubs were done, or not all the tubs were done, but most of the tubs. That they were starting. The turbine arrived and got bolted in. And it was interesting. It picked up. It was only held in 3 positions: 2 at the front and 1 in the middle at the back. And that was in a long slot, which must have been in old money. It was about 3 inches long, this slot, because the engine grew that much as it got hot. So the rear was getting longer.
Wow, I know that. God, yeah. So listen, who was on the Indy team then with you? Obviously Dick Scammell.
Yes, there was Dick Scammell, Arthur Birchall, Huey Absalom. I'm fairly sure Chalky. Yes, it was Chalky. Chalky may have been on F1 at that time, actually, and came over.
I actually think you're right. I think Chalky was on the Indy team.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, and who else was there? Big Smithy, Ray Smith, and do you know, it's terrible. This I should know all these guys. I should.
But it wasn't a big team, though, was it?
No.
2 cars, obviously, as well. There wasn't a spare, was there?
Yes,
there was.
Cars. Yeah, we had 3 cars.
Oh, right.
One was built as a spare. Yes. The first car was built, and then it went off to Trenton, New Jersey, and Arthur went, and Jim Clark drove it round there to test it and shake out and see what wanted doing, and then came back, and they came back with a job list. Bearing in mind this car hadn't been built yet, the next car hadn't been built yet. We were already changing it, from the drawings. We were already doing things that would make it different. So the car was built. We did. And then it comes, unfortunately, cut a long story short, of course, Jim got killed, unfortunately. And so therefore, we then went off to America with the turbine. And Jim Clark was replaced by Jochen Rindt. We had Mike Spence, actually, to be honest. We had Mike Spence and Graham Hill were the lead drivers. Mike was really quick. Graham spent a lot of time. Graham Hill was one of these guys who would spend a lot of time getting the car the way he wanted it. And a lot of this evolved around his seat. So we spent a lot of time on the seat. The minute you got it right, Graham was off. That was it then. He was away. He started putting in really spectacular times. But until then, you thought to yourself, what's this? This is a fitting for a bloody seat, not setting up a racing car, Anyway. Yeah. But that's how Graham was.
The story of him bringing notebooks from like the year before to a Grand Prix, and we used these gears last year. Can we try them now? That sort of stuff all the time with Graham.
Yes, I'm not at all surprised, actually, because we were lucky now because we'd no experience with the turbine, so we couldn't change much at all. But in actual fact, there were 2 gears in that chain case that it was a 3-inch Morse chain that drove from the back of the turbine gearbox into the 4-wheel drive unit, and there were 2 gears. There was a big one up there and a small one down there, and you could swap them around, and that was it really. That was all you got. So we did that, but that was a funny story as well, because what happened is we took the car into the garage that night to change the gears, and Derek Gardner, who's the guy who did the Tyrrell, he was the guy who worked with Ferguson at the time, and he came along and he said, oh, well, you know, I'm going to do these gears, so I want everybody out. So we put the car there, took out all the relevant bits, took the top of the body off, and then we all went off that night and left Derek to it. We came back in the morning, and what Derek had done is he had undone a week's work on Graham's seat, because he just took the whole out and lobbed it in the corner, not realising that everything had to be in exactly the right spot. Anyway, the next day we arrived, Graham turned up, and Arthur said to me, he said, I think, because I was with Arthur Birch on that car, it's the number 2. And Arthur said to me, I think you should go out of the garage. So I said, what's wrong with that? No. He said, just go out, will you? So I went outside, because Arthur had been working with Graham, so he knew Graham. Graham Hill came in, and I'm not kidding you, you could hear that halfway down the pit lane. Graham losing his cool. He was absolutely ballistic over this seat, because it had all been undone. Graham, he'd thrown it all in the corner. Anyway, we changed all the gears around. After a lot of fuss, we got the seat back where he liked it, and we went out and we did more testing, because this was the run-up. You know, you got the carburation day and all the rest of it running up to Indy. And Graham was quick. Graham was very, very quick. And Mike Spence was good. Mike Spence was really quick. He was the quickest. Anyway, the upshot is, as you know probably, Mike Spence hit the wall and got killed. And the reason for that was and now this is always bothered me really, STP took the car apart, and they had this sort of 88-year-old bloke. They were giving the credit for designing the suspension and everything, because STP were like that. They stole all your ideas and everything and credited everybody else. Anyway, the upshot of it was that this old boy had been interfering with the car. Mike Spence, they had problem getting up to speed. They had this, what was the name of the guy they had? A guy called Bruce Walkup was one of their drivers. That didn't work. But they tried a couple of drivers and they weren't getting anywhere. And they said, let's have Mike in the car. We want to know that it's not the car that's wrong, you know? So anyway, Mike got in the car. He did a few laps. Unfortunately, hit the wall. The wheel came off. The steering rack was bolted to the top of the monocoque above the driver's legs and everything. So what happened was the suspension broke, but the wheel remained attached to the steering, and it round through and it hit him in the head. If they'd had a halo in those days, he'd be here now. Unfortunately, that's the way it goes, isn't it? But so unfortunately, poor old Mike, he got killed. A bit later on, we got the introduction. I went in, funnily enough, this was a real thing, because remember, Jim Clark had only just been killed himself. So we were facing, the old man was facing a real black hole. He sort of got himself together. It was all Lotus was going to be folded. I mean, it really got to the point where they were saying, I'm going to pull the plug on this. And he'd got so many commitments with STP and other people, Firestone, and you know, that he almost had no option. He had to keep going. So he did keep going, fortunately, and we ended up at Indy. We lost another driver. This made things even worse, really. And then that really was shaky. That was really shaky. But we were there. So, you know, you couldn't just pack up your toys and go home. So a bit later on, we got Art Pollard. Now, Art Pollard, that was interesting. So I went down to the garage in the morning. I was first there, gasoline alley, you know, as it is. And I got to the garage, and there's this guy leaning against the door of the garage. So I said, hello, can I help you at all? So he said, I was going to have a word with Mr. Chapman about driving his car. So I thought, oh, yeah, here we go. Another optimist. So I said, oh, okay, right, all right, well, don't worry about it. Just wait there. He'll be in eventually, you know. And I treated this guy like a local fence idiot. You know, we had a load of them hanging on the fence around the side of the garage. Yeah. So anyway, a bit later on, of course, the old man came in. Oh, he's up. Oh, you know, big deal. I'd never heard of him, actually. That was my fault, really. But, of course, he was a well-established Indy driver by then. And, of course, I felt extremely bad about that. Art Pollard was a classic. He was a classic. He said, you don't want to eat this stuff that they serve at Indy. I'll get the coffee and donuts this morning. And he'd go out, and he did that all the time. He went out every morning, came back at 10 o'clock, coffee and donuts for all the guys, and we all put on at least a stone, you know. But anyway, he was great. I mean, he got in the car, and I mean, I forget where he qualified it, right? It wasn't on the front row, but it wasn't far off. And he'd never seen it before. And he got a small amount of time in it before he qualified. Obviously, he was an IndyCar driver. You've got to know the circuit. I mean, it sounds silly. It's an oval with 4 corners, but they're all different. You can ask a bloke like Andretti and he'll tell you there's so many different ways you can do these corners, you know. But anyway, that was it, really. We did, Art qualified the car. And we set off, and unfortunately, Graham went off to Monaco, which he did quite well at. And then he came back, and by then, of course, the STP had got their man on pole. I can't for the life of me think of his name, and I should have written it down because I have these lapses, I'm afraid. Anyway, he was good. He was a good driver without a doubt, and he put it on. He put it on pole, and we came back, or Graham came back. And then we went into the race. And during the race, unfortunately, we had various bits and bobs that went wrong. I was on the fueling with Arthur. The car came in. Oh, I tell you. Now, this is interesting. Now, a night or two before the race, we'd all qualified. And I came in, I was in the garage working late, and I'd done something, and I felt absolutely shattered. So I sat down. Got myself a Coke because there was a fridge full of stuff there. Got myself a Coke, sat down with my back to the wall. There were 2 sets of doors that went into the garage, and I sat between the 2 next to the fridge. I mean, I was around the corner, really. There was no proper seating in there at all. So I just sat on the floor, and I was just trying to gather my wits. And the door opened, and in came Flame Out Fred, which was the guy that was sent over with the turbine from Canada. So anyway, Flame Out started working on the back of the car. And I watched him for a bit. And then he did that. And then he went over and he worked on the back of the other car. And I said, hello, Fred, what are you up to? And he jumped because he obviously didn't know I was there. So he said, Dougie, he said that, yeah. So I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm just ensuring that they're very reliable.
Okay.
That was STP speak for we're turning your power down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, had I realised, I'd have said, oh, show me what you do. And I'd have done it back the other way. But, you know, he probably wouldn't have said anything. He would have probably done it happen. And I'll tell you why. Because either Andy Granatelli or one of those guys had put pressure on him to come and turn our power down. And that's what he did. And STP were like that. They didn't play a clean game at all, you know. Yeah. Anyway, Graham still drove a very good race, considering.
Yeah.
But what happened in front is part of the front suspension let go, and the car hit the wall, and we retired it.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I don't know how it happened, but the nose cone off the car somehow got into the crowd. And I remember standing there watching it go up because you got, I think it's like 250,000 people in the main grandstand there, and this nose over people's heads disappeared up and over the top and down the other side. It went. That's the last story, that one. Someone's got it on the wall somewhere.
Sure. I've just thought of someone else who was on the team. Would have been Jim Pickles.
Yeah, Jim Pickles, and also a guy I just saw the other day when we had a bit of a reunion. There was Joe 90 himself. Derek
Martin.
Willie Coo.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Willie Coo.
Yeah.
I think, yes, Joe 90.
Yeah.
So we had Derek. Yeah, well, he's just gone back to Taiwan, which is where he always said he was going back. He actually couldn't get back at one time. He came over here. That's why we had a reunion. He came over and couldn't get back. So we had a bit of a reunion while he was here. And
I think, was it you or Beaky said it was the first time you'd seen each other in 50 odd years?
Yeah. Well, 90, that was it from that day, from there. Well, we did the 72. We did work on the 72 together.
So listen, after Indy 68.
Yeah.
You came back. What did you do after that?
We came back. I got put on Formula 3. What they did, they kind of dispersed the team. We had all sorts of stuff going on. When I joined Team Lotus, they were probably the biggest racing team in the world at that time. We were doing F1, F2, F3. We were doing sports cars. And we were also, what else was he doing? And Indy. So, I mean, there were six operations, 5 operations there, all under one roof.
And even saloon cars with the Cortinas and stuff.
That's right. Yeah. I forgot about that. There was the 47. There was the Cortina. Yeah. So there was a hell of a lot going on. So what would happen is the Indycar team would be dispersed into the rest of the factory, doing different things. And I got put on Formula 3 with Dougie Bridge and John Miles driving, which was my first years. And we ran the 41X, which was the 41, which was a standard production, Lotus production Formula 3 car. But the X, it was made longer because he was so tall. John Miles was taller than most people. So they made it only an inch or two, made it longer, and that was his car. So we ran that. We went into, it was at that time, I'm pretty sure that was the way it went. And Dougie Bridge and I ran that, which was really nice. Dougie Bridge is a terrific bloke. He'd done a lot of motoring, he'd been with Lotus a long time. I learned a lot off Dougie. And it was very much just the two of us. So 2 of you in a drum. I'd suddenly gone from 6 down to 2, It was really quite good. So we saw out the rest of the year like that.
And that was, I would have thought the F3 season would be quite busy, wouldn't it, Doug? The amount of races.
We did a lot. We went to Europe quite a bit. We did different series. I think it was an oil sponsored series at that time. So probably Duckham's or one of those. I can't remember which team, might have been Shell, was sponsoring that. So everywhere we went, there was a lot of Shell promotion going on, stuff like that. Although that didn't really interfere with us. We just sort of turned up and did our thing, But we did reasonably well at that. John, I think John was very good in the 47. I think that was because it was closed in. The minute he got to an open wheeler, he was less successful. I can only think that was the difference. He was a very clever driver. He knew a lot about driving. He knew a lot about the circuits. He was a very good bloke, actually. He was a great guy to work with. I mean, I forget where we were, something like Silverstone, I think. And he came in and wanted a gear ratio change in the Formula 3 car. So I think, so I whipped the gears out. I changed the gear ratio, put it back in, but I got it back in the wrong way. So instead of having an H pattern, he had 2 units. He had to come up and go. He said, the minute I changed gear, I realised what you'd done. So I think he'd come across this before. I think the first time he changed gear, he was too high. He went from first to third in the box. And then he changed back, and he realised what had happened. And he took that on, and he actually ran that car through practice with that gear change. And I thought that was amazing. Absolutely amazing. It took a bit of working out what I'd done. After I'd done it, Anyway, he came back in. After that, we changed the radiator. But John always seemed to finish second. There were other quite good drivers around at the time, you have to say. But he did, and I think it was just that. But it was always close. It was never miles behind. It was always close. And the thing was, that what happened there as well, Formula 1 had taken on. I've got to be careful with my dates now. Formula 1 had taken on sticky rubber. We got the first YB11s, which were the Firestone sticky rubber tyres. Right. And this had just been introduced. And because the rears of the Formula 3 car were the same size as the fronts on the Formula 1, the old man talked Firestone into doing one set of rear sticky rubber for the Formula 3 car.
Okay.
Which was great until we got a puncture. We were very lucky. Goodyear repaired it for us, actually.
Oh.
Very kindly stitched it up, which is what he did in those days. Anyway, the upshot of it was that was the Formula 3. John, I say, a terrific driver. And, of course, I met him again when we did 72, when we went into that 72 season. What happened, actually, the following year, we did, in 1969, 1969, yeah, we did the 64, which was the four-wheel drive. It was the same four-wheel drive, but it wasn't the same system at all. We used what was called a Foyt, which was an engine that Ford had sold to A.J. Foyt.
Oh, right.
It was the current Indy engine they were using, the V8. Mm-hmm. That was the car that they'd used in the GT40.
And this was for Indy only? Again.
Yes, but there had been, it was the same engine they used in the GT40, but they'd now sleeved it down to the Indy size engine, which was 2.4 litre V8 turbocharged.
Yeah.
Producing 1,200 horsepower on methanol and nitro. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's just amazing. That thing could spin the wheels like all the way around the circuit. You know, it's just ridiculous. Anyway, our car was four-wheel drive, so the idea was that we would make more use of the power that way. And Andretti had been driving this engine. He knew it very well. So we took the car once again was taken over, and it was run around Indy. The 64 was run around Indy. And Mario was driving it, and yes, it was great. It came back, and we then prepared the car. But having said that, we were in terrible trouble with that car. We were really a long way back for the manufacturing of it, and we were working all sorts of silly hours. You know, I mean, we were there till 11, 12, midnight, 1 o'clock, and then we were in at 8 the next day. I mean, you scarcely had to go home and wash and come back again, you know. Anyway, we did that. We got the car there. Yeah, chalky. When we took the cars over unbuilt. We actually finished them off in America. We actually, I'm wondering actually, when I'm saying that we took the car over and drove it, I don't think we did. I think I'm getting mixed up there. I think we took that to Snetterton and drove it round Snetterton. I know we did one of the Indy cars at Snetterton. I think that was probably it, just to check it out, shakedown, so to speak, you know. But it wasn't finished. I mean, we had all the cars. What happened was all the air equip, which was the piping we used, and a lot of stuff had to be of a certain specification, or you weren't allowed to use it at Indy. And all the piping had to be air equipped. So we had to get air equipped from America because we didn't really have, we had our own equivalent, but they wouldn't accept that. So we had stuff flown over. The thing was, the air equipment was being flown over here at the same time as we were flying the bare chassis over there. So we got over there, and I think we had the four corners on the cars, and that was about it. And everything else we had to do while we were there. So they needed plumbing. Oh, we might have had the engines in, but anyway, we needed to plumb them, and we had to do all the geometry and set them up. And this was one of the times that I remember we were working late, and we got to the point where with this new four-wheel drive had this wonderful steering system that worked backwards. So we had a steering rack on top of the monocoque again, but that yes, I'm pretty, it was there, or it was just at the top of the footbox. But anyway, the arms came out of that in front of the top wishbone, but they went back to the steering links on the bottom of the, it's all coming back now, on the bottom of the steering arms of the uprights. But so they, instead of using the front end that you would do, they used the rear, because that was the only way we could get the steering lock. You couldn't get the steering lock if the arms came straight out. What happened was we had two idler arms built into the front of the monocoque, idler chassis arms. They were linked together, and then we had I know it was a left-hand drive steering rack bolted to the top of the monocoque, and then it picked up on one of these idler arms and moved the two idler arms. The the idler, stay with me, the idler arms came back onto the steering link. Well, to the steering arms on the uprights. Now, the problem was to do bump steer on the cars, which the old man was crazy about, if you remember, you could raise and lower these steering box, the idler arms on the chassis, and you could raise and lower the links in the pickup on the steering arms. So it was infinitely variable virtually. And then, of course, the length of the steering arm was important because it had to be a ratio that matched the length of the wishbones so that when they went up and down, they didn't change effective length. They all stayed the same length. That was the idea. Actually, years later, you have ideas about these things. I mean, obviously, it goes into your mind. And one of the things I thought that we missed out on, although I don't know if it had ever occurred to the old man, but when you think about it, those steering arms, if you've got caster built into your front suspension, as all cars do, even though 3 or 4 degrees, as you turn the steering, the end of that steering arm rises and lowers as the thing casters, as it turns, because it starts off in a low position, and because the kingpin has got sort of 4 or 5 degrees caster in it, as it goes up, it raises and lowers that point as it goes across. Now, what we could have done is actually built into the idler arms 2 or 3 degrees of caster in there, and then they would have matched the steering arms. Too late now. But that would have saved a lot of bump steer problems. The other thing that came to me many years later, the problem with the gas turbine was it was driving all the time. So the drivers had to just put the brakes on to go into the corners. They couldn't lift because if they did, it took about 2 or 3 seconds for the engine to spool up again to get your power. But what we should have done, I think, I don't know, I may be wrong, is put a wastegate on there so that as we came into the corner, we could have kept the foot on the turbine, but wasted the gas instead of driving the gearbox, wasted it off, used the brake, switched it straight back on again, as they do with a dump valve now. Once again, too late. But anyway, the 76, the 64, Andretti.
That was for Mario, Graham Hill and Jochen Rindt, wasn't it?
Yes. Now, the thing is that it was really going very, very quick. It was very quick. Andretti said it was the quickest thing he'd ever driven around Indy. It was wonderful. He loved it. He absolutely loved it. Unfortunately, we crashed. And we crashed because the rear hub on the car, there were quite large hubs as well, especially compared with a Formula One car of that period, because we had tremendous torque from this engine. The outright power wasn't as much, but the torque was phenomenal. And it came in very, very low, but it went out quite high. So instead of with the combustion engine where the torque increases as the revs increase, with the turbine, it was the other way around. Because what you'd got is you got maximum gas thrust through the turbine blades onto the gearbox. But as the thing got faster, the gearbox turbine blades were turning the same speed, or they caught up the turbine. They were never the same speed, but they caught the turbine up. So the differential between the two, as the differential got closer, so the torque dropped. And so if you were to have a standing start, you'd never get near it because all four-wheel drives with maximum power. Now, I mean, for instance, you could never start the car off the line with maximum power. You had to go to, I think we ran them up about 60% because it would have just smashed everything up. The power was so great. So you always started at 60% and then worked your way up from there. Going back to the 64, the problem was that the rear hub, the machining of the hub, the design of the hub had put a right angle where a bearing went onto the hub before the drive flange for the wheel. And this actually induced a fracture. Because it was at right angles, it induced a fracture. What should have happened is there should have been a large radius between the back of the flange and the bearing and the bearing as it was pressed on. And there should have been a collar on there with the radius on the inside of the collar, but giving you the vertical bit. You needed that for the oil seal that stopped the bearing, that kept the grease in the bearings. So you had to have this surface, you know. Anyway, hindsight clear. Right-hand rear broke off the Andretti lost the wheel. I got actually for the book, the turbine, the Indy years, written by Andrew Ferguson. I'd actually got the photographs from the local newspaper, which I'd picked up at the time, which gave staged photographs of the wheel coming off, the turning, hitting the wall, and then the thing catching light. It was a big fire, but you know, the funny thing is, you don't actually see what's burning because the heat and the flames are transparent because the methanol has got its own oxygen, so it doesn't need air. So you don't see any color. So what happens is, at the top of the flames, you suddenly see little sparkles and stuff like that. And what that is that's dust and that it's sucked up and it sets light to it as soon as it hits the air. So it comes up through the middle of the flame, and then as soon as it comes out the top, it starts sparkling, and then you realise this is why when you'd have pit lane fires and drivers were on fire and nobody could see it because you couldn't see that they were actually on fire, which was not good for those things. Anyway, I remember when I went there, when I first went to Indy in '68, one of the guys introduced me to a guy called Jim Hurdebees. Said, "Oh, Jim Hurdebees, he's been doing this for years. You know, he's a legend," which he was. And I shook Jim Hurdebees' hand, and it was like holding a bag of spanners because he'd no skin left on his hands at all from fires. He'd been burnt a couple of times, and he was terrible. His face was a mess. I mean, they'd done the best they could for him. You know. He was a very nice guy, actually. Jim Hurdebees. He in 1968 he ran a front engine roadster. He was the last, I think, was the last of the front engine roadsters to run. And I think he actually did he qualify? I'm not sure. I think he came around the corner on turn 4, hit the wall. It came into the middle of the circuit, and it was a bit like those clown cars you see at the circus. All the 4 wheels fell off it, and he got out and walked away, and that was it. You know, but he was a hell of a character. He had a couple of mallard ducks around his garage all the time because his car was a mallard. So he had these.
Right.
Yeah, it was really stupid. Yeah. Anyway, there was a lot of fun. There was a lot of fun at Indy amongst the guys. Yeah.
So after Mario crashed, what happened then?
Well, they made a big thing of it because they had been trying to get rid of us for a long time. The rest of the gear, the rest of the guys, and they don't, as I say, they don't play clean. We'd had a load of stuff. They looked at the car initially in scrutineering, and they said, "Oh, you haven't got chrome molybdenum and chrome moly wishbones. We'd made them out of aviation steel, which is like, you know, absolutely true, spot on stuff, grain checked, the whole bit. And we'd made them out of that. And they said, "Oh, no, we're not going to accept that. You have to get them made out of chrome moly." Well, we didn't have any chrome moly in this country, so STP flew a load of sheets of chrome moly back over to the factory, and the guys stayed up day and night making new wishbones, sent them all back, but they came back and they weren't heat treated. So they had to be heat treated, which is a process where you bring the whole thing up to one temperature, drop it down, and it takes all the stress out of the material where the weld has been done, and, you know, and they've been burnt, they've been bent. And all that. Now, everything was great until we got them back from heat treating, because we'd made a major mistake there. Nobody had drilled a ventilation hole. They were fabricated wishbones. They were top half, bottom half, welded around the edges, you know, bushes welded into them. It was a sealed unit, and they blew up like balloons. And there's nothing you could do. We hammering with a sledgehammer, these things would not go back anywhere. So we had to fit them as they were. They do look a bit strange, but the end points were still the same. It's just that instead of being a flat section of about, in those days, probably 3/4 of an inch maybe, they'd blow like 3 inches. It was just, I mean, you've got, I don't know, they must still be around, those wishbones, because I think the car's still about. They rebuilt one, took it back, you know. But anyway, So that was a bit of a strange thing. But we tried to do everything. They were trying to get us out at every turn. Every turn. Matter of fact, funny thing was, going back again, I'll tell you, I'll dance backwards and forwards. Sorry. When we were running the gas turbines, all the other guys got together. The other drivers said, "Oh, we've got to get rid of these guys somehow. You know, we've got to get rid of these guys." So I said, "I know. We won't test at the same time they test. So there'll be nothing for the crowds to see. So test days. So we thought, okay. Well, I say we, you know, collectively. The old man said, right, okay, well, whatever happens, we'll always have a car out on the test track. And it took about 2 days for these guys to realise they weren't getting any testing in at all.
But you were.
We were. Anyway, that got blown out the window. The next thing they said, oh, they objected to the turbine. They said, well, the thing is, a gas turbine at sea level is under a lot more stress because of the atmospheric pressure than it is when it's 36,000 feet in the air. So what we need is to make sure we're safe, we need a scatter shield built around the compressor housing on the turbine. So they insisted. So we had to. So USAC came to us and said, "I'm sorry about this. It's got to be done. You have to have a scatter shield around there, and it's got to be of something pretty substantial." And they quoted, I think, 1/4 inch thick steel. So anyway, STP rushed out and bought loads of titanium at only a small fortune, and we were left to our own devices. So the old man went out and got a load of boilerplate, second-hand rusty boilerplate, and we carved it up, and we got some angle iron, and we made up these things, and it was the crudest thing you ever saw, and it bolted over, because they thought that a compressor blade would come out, go through the side of the car, through the fuel tanks, out the other side, and hit a driver that's going past. And as we pointed out, they wouldn't be going past anyway. But anyway, the upshot of it was we stuck to making this compressor cover out of boilerplate, and it was that terrible checker plate stuff. It looked awful, you know. And we bolted this down, didn't even paint it, pushed the cars out. They looked at it and said, "Yes, we'll accept that. Now put it on the weighbridge." So we put it on the weighbridge, and it weighed the same. And that. Suddenly they thought to themselves, "How have they done this?" Because, you know, it passed scrutineering, it was weighed, it was spot on for weight, as the old man was very particular, spot on for weight, it was drained of fuel and everything, you know, and we put it back on with this huge lump of metal in the middle of it, and it doesn't weigh anymore. Now, what the hell's going on here? And of course, STP had saved a few pounds by putting titanium in, but it was still a lot more heavy because it hadn't been there before. You know, there was nothing there before. Now, all of a sudden, added extra. What they didn't know is when we constructed the monocoques originally, they were so underweight that we had to line the bottom of the fuel tanks with lead flashing to get the thing up. So we were using building material from houses, lead flashing to get the weight up. Well, all we did, of course, was take that out. When we put this big lump of steel, which was lovely because it was smack in the middle, as soon as we put that in, we took all the lead flashing out, and the car same weight. You know, they couldn't get over that. They couldn't get over that. But having said that, you know, it's interesting, really, because, as I say, this scrutineering is quite particular. You have to jack the car up at the front, and the car has to be designed so the lowest point for the fuel is at the back, in the middle, so you drain it, so there's absolutely no fuel in it. They're weighed dry. So we'd passed all that. AJ Foyt pushed his car onto the scales, and they said, right, is it dry? Yes, it's dry. Undone the nut at the back. Yeah, no fuel in it. Did it up again. Right, weigh the car. Okay, you're all right. Off you go. He jumps in the car and drives away. So hang on, this can't be right. You've just taken all the fuel out of it. So they had a closer look. He got fuel everywhere. He got it in the roll hoop of the car. He got it in places we didn't know you could get fuel in. Of course, if you could do one less stop, you'd save yourself a bag of time, you know. And he pulled up for that. But AJ Foyt and his dad and all the rest of it have been doing Indy for so long, they had their own rules, a separate set of rules, you know.
Goals.
About that. But he did get caught.
So you didn't run at Indy in '69?
No. We worked horrific hours. It was probably I don't know, there's a 72 as well, isn't there? We worked the longest hours I can remember at that point in time. And we were all in a terrible state. We all went back into the hotels. What happened was we had to withdraw the cars eventually because we couldn't get stuff made. Every machine shop we went to couldn't do it, didn't have time. I'm sure there was a conspiracy out there to make sure we didn't run. The USAC made a huge thing of this damage. They took all sorts of photographs. You got guys walking back, holding stuff in the air, you know, making sure all the cameras could see it, all the press could see it. Now, they did their best to get rid of us. Anyway, which they did eventually, of course, because the old man wouldn't go back again after all that, you know. Anyway, we couldn't run the cars. So we withdrew the cars and all the mechanics went to bed for a couple of days to catch up. And then we went back and cleared up. Ford owned the engines. They wanted the engines back. STP, in theory, owned the chassis, except they didn't pay for them. So, in fact, that nearly bankrupted Lotus because they spent the money. I mean, I don't know. When we did the turbines, they were £250,000 each, the turbines. So what these...
In 68?
Yeah.
Gosh.
In those days, that would have run your F1 team for a year, you know, no problem, you know. But anyway, the upshot of it was the same thing happened with these 64. And the old man had bankrolled the whole thing up till then. And we went back without any money because STP refused to pay for them.
Yeah. And of course, the irony is as well that Mario jumped ship, got in another car and won his only Indy.
Yeah, he did. He got in a Coyote Ford and won Indy. Yeah. That was ironic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a fantastic bloke. I mean, I don't begrudge him that at all because he was a terrific driver. You know, he could drive anything. He was really, really good.
Yeah. So again, you come home and the team gets split up into doing all the other bits and pieces instead.
Well, when we came back from that was disastrous, and Lotus had no money, absolutely no money. So a lot of guys had to go. So
really?
Yeah, there was a big weeding out, you know, and well, I say weeding out, that's cruel. There was a lot of guys there who had been with Lotus through thick and thin for a long time, lost their jobs. Now, why I kept mine, I don't know, because I'm not being modest. There were a lot of guys there that were a lot better than me, had a lot more experience than I did, but I kept my job. And the only reason I can think is because Dick Scowell had to do the hiring and firing. He was now chief of all the racing. And because he was the guy who persuaded me to come over from developments, funny persuasion, told me. But anyway, because of that, I think he felt he owed me an obligation there, and I kept my job. I was very lucky, very lucky. And then we sort of, I can't remember what happened from then on. There was a lot of clearing up to do, a lot of sorting out. It was all a bit of a haze. And then then things got going again. I don't know whether maybe the Gold Leaf money had started to appear or something. I don't know. But things did change, and we started on the 72. What you've got to remember with Lotus is every project gets a number, and they're consecutive. So racing cars have got numbers, but they won't be consecutive because he did other things in between. I mean, at this time as well, he was involved in the boat business, if you remember. He was doing the what were they? Sunshine boats, I call them. But anyway, the upshot of those, and they, of course, turned into a nightmare. So a lot of time he was distracted by that. He was designing aircraft stuff. He was also involved in an off-road car. He was designing suspensions and stuff for the barge off, races and things like that. He fancied a crash. So there were all these things going on at the same time. And I'm afraid, and we were running out of money. We ran out of money, period. The Gold Leaf stuff came in. I mean, I don't know exact timing of that. You'd have to have Freddie Bushell or someone Freddie's not with us, but I mean, Freddie was the only guy who could really put his finger on the time money moved from here, there, and everywhere. like I say, there was only a lot of Lotus money was on an island that only came out of the water at low tide. You know, but anyway, the upshot of it was we got the money for the 72 from somewhere, and we started doing the 72.
So would that have been in 69, Doug? Obviously, or late 69 sort of thing?
I think, yeah, end of 69.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because obviously, with there was the other racing going on as well. There was the 47 and the F1 racing was still going on. You know, there were a lot of things happening, but the team actually shrunk. I mean, it shrunk from all those I mentioned to start with. Some of which I don't think. Obviously, the big sports cars have been stopped. We weren't doing those. With 38s and something like that. Anyway, what we've done is we've come down to one team, effectively, from all that lot, one team, you know.
I was going to say, one of the people that moved on at the end of 69 was Bob Dance, of all people.
He did, yeah, he did. Yeah, I think he didn't go to Brabham. I think he went to Brabham or McLaren.
I think it was March to start with Mario on the 701.
Yeah, I had a bit of time. Anyway, the thing is that, so anyway, the upshot of it was we built the 72. And I remember getting the former, building the former, and I built the model for the wind tunnel. The former was a 10-inch box that was the length of the car. And then you had profiles cut that fit the thing every 10 inches. It was all done in 10s for some reason. And then because that was very confusing as well. What we'd done, once we'd got all that done, we then layered narrow strips of plywood on that, about an inch wide and probably about 2 mil, 3 mil thick. We layered those in strips over the top, then went over that with Tetracell. And with that, we then got ourselves a mould, and they made the top of the screen and the top of the bodywork off that, and the nose, which were the fiberglass pieces, and the side pods were modelled out of fiberglass as well. So all that was all the initial moulding was done off that, and then the monocoques were built and the chassis, and we then transferred, and then all the things. So everybody that was there was making little bits and pieces. The whole of the workshop was doing fabrication. Whereas before you'd have guys racing and one thing like that, all that was sort of stopped, and we were all doing fabrication. But I think the F1 cars carried on for the rest of the season. But of course, obviously, you know, I wasn't on that side, so I didn't really take a lot of notice of what was going on, to be honest. But so they finished their bit. We fall back and regroup, and we're making these bits. The 72 came out. I'm jumping a bit here, but and then we had the nightmare of trying to get a 72 to work, which didn't work out of the box, unfortunately.
Right.
If anybody's seen the Peter War film, it's quite good, actually. It does explain exactly what happened and how badly it went wrong, you know. We took it to Spain. We had trouble getting it through the border.
Now you're on the race team now? The F1
yes,
race.
we've gone onto F1 by now. And yes, as I say, I was one of the lucky ones kept on.
Yeah.
And my analogy of today's racing and how we were is there were 6 of us for 3 cars, manufacture, transport, the whole bit. Now they have more than that on the left front wheel in a tyre change and a wheel change. It's really good.
They have more than that in catering.
Yeah, yes. Oh, that's another thing, catering. What's catering? We only ate when we got a chance. I remember several times booking into a hotel, leaving me luggage, going to the circuit, going back to the hotel afterwards, picking up my luggage and flying home. Because the rest of the time we went to the circuit, we never seen a bed. That was it.
Yeah.
But that's jumping ahead, really. But the 72 was a bit of a nightmare in as much as it didn't work. It didn't work.
Yeah. Simple as that.
Round the test track, and it had anti-squat and anti-dive, as you know, which was the big, you know, it had 7 degrees of anti-squat and anti-dive. I still feel it would have worked had they gone to something like probably 3 degrees or 2 degrees even. I think it would have had an input without the bad influence it had on the chassis, because it was a smaller angle, smaller angle. But anyway, when they decided that the anti-squat and anti-dive didn't work, they took it out, which meant changing all the front suspension. Well, as Peter War says in the film, you know, all that front suspension was as much as you get in a full-blown chassis of the old tubular. You know, I mean, there was pipes and bits and bobs everywhere. Anyway, it all had to be unriveted. The monocoque had to be unzipped. all that came out, completely new frame made, put back in. The geometry was changed, everything was changed. And we did that. And of course, the rear end was a bit different because it was on long radius arms. I think we just changed the pickup points. So that changed the angle of drive on the suspension, you know? Changed the pickup points. Although at that time, no, I tell you what, yeah, we were running a wishbone at the bottom of the rear suspension at that time, which was a fantastic piece of kit. What they did is they took the gearbox, took the back off the gearbox, machined that down, put an aluminium plate on there that was triangular, if you like a pyramid shape, and the bottom end of that aluminium plate held the rear of the bottom wishbone.
And it all came good at that point, didn't it?
Oh, yes. It all started to change then. Yeah. We took it out. The car behaved itself. We had one or two other little bits and bobs in between. Cooling was a problem at one time. There were other bits and bobs, as you can imagine. The other thing I remember is going to Silverstone and testing in like January or something like that, and it was freezing, absolutely freezing. We fired up the engines and they blew the scavenge pumps off, the pipes off, because the oil was so thick it couldn't, and it just hydraulic and blew the pipes off. So we had to put all the pipes back on, in the freezing cold. And of course, then it wasn't like it is now. It was all done in the open, and when we got a bit of testing in on the 72.
But I think I remember either John Miles or Peter Waugh saying to me that for the 72 there was hardly any actual proper testing at all.
No.
Done at the circuit. No,
we went straight to Spain. I mean, with the car, not knowing, and when it came back from Spain, it's terrible. It's horrible. Well, anything, and that was the first time we realised that we were going to have to strip the whole thing down and do it all again.
And this was Jochen and John Miles, wasn't it?
Yeah. He was, Once again, I think John Miles was good there. Well, John Miles, of course, came unstuck when it came to removing wings out at Monza. That was an honour.
But Jochen didn't like testing much, did he? Jochen,
no, he didn't like testing. He would duck out of that if he could. Good. Graham was up for it. He liked his driving and he got on with. Graham was tremendous, actually, especially. It's a story well told, and I won't go over it. But when Jimmy got killed, if it wasn't for Graham, I'm pretty sure things would have been a hell of a lot worse than they were. Not only did he pull the team together and act as a beacon, to the system, but he also won the World Championship as well.
And for a start, I think it was wasn't it the first race after Jimmy's accident?
Yeah.
Was it you won in Spain, I think, to really bring the team back from the brink? Because Chapman wasn't even there, was he, at that point? And it was virtually all Graham's doing.
Yeah, you're right. Graham stepped into the breach without a doubt. He was very, very good on that. And he was a lot less demanding as well. That was an interesting point, because Graham was a high what do they call it, a highly expensive driver, in as much as what he wanted doing. He wanted loads doing. I remember he eventually left Lotus. This is jumping a bit. He went to and was run by a guy called Tony Cleverley. And what happened is that Graham went out in the 49 that Rob Walker had bought for him.
That's right.
Did a few laps, came in, gave Tony Cleverley a list about 8 feet long, as he would do at Lotus. And Tony said, "Right, we'll check the oil level. We're off to the hotel now. I don't know what you're doing." And that was it. That was Graham's job list. They wouldn't do it. He said, "No, don't be silly."
Excellent.
But Tony Cleverley is a nice bloke. I like Tony. He was a funny bloke. He had a guy working with him, Stan. I don't remember Stan's surname, but he was good as well. And they were real characters, I have to say. People keep on about the real characters, and it's a well-used word. But
and sometimes people will think, as Rob Walker's, obviously it was the very last, wasn't it, privateer team, I would say. But sometimes people would say that they're not as professional as a works team and all that, but they were. They had to be.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Hesketh and all that.
They were good. We did keep them up to speed. On the trouble is, they had a 49 at that time, and we were on 72. So very difficult to do anything to help, But Rob Walker was a very nice bloke. He was a gentleman. He was a true gentleman. I met him. I remember the first time, I think it was in Spain, funnily enough, on the first race, and we got the truck there, and I couldn't quite back it into where it needed to go, and Tyrrell's were on one side, and I said to Ken Tyrrell, oh, sorry, I've swapped from Walker to Tyrrell. Tyrrell was another very nice. But I did say to Ken Tyrrell, do you mind moving your truck? Sure, I'll do that. And he got the bloke to move the truck for me. I mean, it was just amazing, you know. And I thought, oh, crikey, I've only asked him, you know, and he's done it straight away. But he was another gentleman. He was really good. I like him. He was very good. Yeah. But Red Walker, when it came to it, I mean, he was telling me that his last Rolls Royce wasn't as good as the other one he had because the radiator wouldn't cool. And when they were away in I don't know where it was, some foreign climes, it started to overheat a bit. You know?
Well, you say that his occupation on his passport was listed as gentleman, wasn't it? Literally.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But he was. I mean, that was it. Yeah. No, he knew his stuff all right. And actually, it's interesting because I just watched a program the other day on what's the name of that racetrack? The oldest racetrack with the bank circuit, Brooklands. I watched a thing on Brooklands, and they got one of Rob Walker's cars there that he drove, and they did a service and built it up, and his son drove it. And I thought that was really, really good. I didn't know anything about that side of him at all. You don't really know the history of these drivers and stuff because they don't like sit down with you and have long talks. You know that you do with the rest of the guys. Sure. Although having said that, I must admit the last time I remember a team talk where we were all together was probably, it was Monaco, I think, where we went into a cafe. I think I told you about this one, where we went into a restaurant and we were having trouble with the 72, and the old man got his pen out and started drawing on the tablecloth all the suspension of the 72 and what they were trying to achieve, the shape of the tub, the aerodynamics, the change in wing attitude, and all that. And he drew it all on this tablecloth. And the woman that owned this restaurant went ballistic when she saw what he'd done. And unfortunately, we didn't bring that back. I should have brought that back. It would have been worth a fortune by now, wouldn't it?
Would. Put it in a frame and stuff on the wall.
Misty.
That's right. That's right. Doug, we're going to have to wrap it up. We've gone on for a little bit longer than what we thought.
Sorry about that.
Really good. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. This was nice. We might actually chop it into two pieces. We'll see later on, sort of thing. But thanks ever so much for giving us your time. That was really interesting. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely. Talk for England. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thanks, Doug. We'll finish there. Cheers.
Cheers, chap. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.